And we're very honoured to have the President of the European Economic and Social Committee, Staffan Nilsson, here with us to moderate this session. So the EESC has been very closely involved in the Rio process, in the preparatory process. I had the pleasure to attend one of their events, and I suspect there were others in February, and then again in July, immediately after the conference, they held a very useful event bringing together a lot of stakeholders in Brussels. So we're very happy that they've got involved in our conference at a high level, and we're also interested to hear what future plans are to work in this. But I now hand over to you, Staffan, to moderate this session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much to the EEB and to all of you that I am invited to moderate this panel. It means that I have the right and the possibilities to cut off and to manage that we could have in the end also possibilities to exchange before we have to close the session. I will only say a few words as president of this famous EESC. And of course, as you said, we have tried to play our role 1 year more or less ahead the Rio summit, which was held in June. But I have to say that, of course, we are a treaty-based body to give advice to the institutions. But as a representative of civil society, we need the contact with all other platforms, networks, and organizations. Then, of course, that it is when it comes to all these issues, which is close to environmental and sustainability, EEB is a very important body for us. And I'm happy to see even that the previous man before you, John Hontales, is sitting, but he is a little shy, so he has put himself far away on distance. But it's good to see you, John. Also some other friends which we have held in the network we have done. We try to play our role, very strong role in order to facilitate that there could be a support for a reasonable outcome of Rio. I know that when I talk with my members like Krzysztof Kamieniecki, other coming from the environmental side, there could be a disappointment of the outcome of the final declaration for Rio. On the other side, to get world leaders to come to one place to focus on sustainable development in itself, it's rather great. And now, my slogan is to follow the European Economic and Social Committee the road from Rio, because Rio was an event more or less a starting point. We have 9th of October, we have organized, because during the briefing in Rio, Commissioner Potocnik was very positive and underlined also the need, of course, to involve the civil society. On 9th of October, we will have an interinstitutional workshop together, 1.5 hours, to see what is the planning from the Committee of Regions, the European Parliament, the Commission, and the European Economic and Social Committee, to indicate that this was not the final stage to go to the Rio summit. Between brackets, I can say that, okay, we were there a lot of days, but we didn't pay more cost than normal costs of hotels in Brussels. Perhaps it's needed to say, depending on the reaction from the European Parliament before the Rio summit. Nevertheless, we have to see what this panel today can bring on the table for the future. One last comment is, when we had the side event during Rio summit with the participants of the Commission's President José Barroso in the EU pavilion, 2 members raised the question about what is the planning for a revised program from the Commission about sustainable development. And his message was very clear, because I know that some of you want that the Commission perhaps revised the previous declaration, but his was very strong. 2020 is a strategy for European Union, a smart, inclusive, etc. Strategy for European Union. It means that we together need to focus that 2020 also cover the horizontal issue about sustainable development. It's up to us to see that all these flagships, all these goals have cover the sustainable development. But let me finish and to see. I have been told that the speakers are recommended to speak 6-7 minutes or around. I will be polite, but I will also secure that we have enough time for exchange. So please, Evelyne, may I ask you to take the floor first? I think you have got so a good explanation who you are from the briefing members have got in this conference. But if you have any hidden things to tell us, it could be interesting, or if you have an additional about yourself, you are allowed to tell us.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm Evelyne Huytebroek, Minister for Environment and Energy here in the region of Brussels capital. And first of all, I would like to thank the EEB for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today about the future European environmental policy and how this should align with the outcome of the recent UN Conference of Sustainable Development in Rio. If certain of you remember, it was exactly 2 years ago, the 1st of October 2010, in the middle of our Belgian presidency. I was also standing, it was not here, but here in Brussels, giving a speech in which I was defending the need for a 7th environmental action program. The Council conclusion adopted in December 2010 under the Belgian presidency for improving environmental policy instruments contained a strong call for a 7th program and have guided the debates we have had in Council on the content of the next EAP. The European Parliament too sent out a strong call for a 7th program in its resolutions of 20 April of this year. And the European Commission is now, I hear, finalizing its proposal for this 7th program, which will be published, and I hear that Mr. Potocnik said, for the end of the year. Many of us who were in Rio were, I can say, a little bit disappointed with the outcome of the conference, and so was I. But even if the outcome for many topics was not ambitious enough, there are several elements we can pick up from Rio and build on to set out an ambitious European environmental and sustainable development policy. The major outcome from Rio, the agreement, is the agreement to establish Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, by 2015. Even if the themes of the SDG are not yet clearly defined, reference is made to all the themes mentioned in the outcome document, The Future We Want. In this regard, I hope there will be an SDG established on sustainable cities, a subject that is important to me, but not only to me, but to me as Minister of the Brussels Capital Region for the Environment and Energy. Cities are of key importance for the transition towards a green economy. Predictions state that by 2050, 2/3 of the world population will live in cities, accounting for 90% of the world economy and consuming 80 to 19% of the available energy and a similar percentage of CO2 emissions. Cities were recognized in Rio as not only being part of the problem, but part of the solutions as hubs for change, innovation, and the promotion of sustainable societies. Since urbanization is also a huge challenge in Europe, I advocate for a strong urban dimension in the 7th program. Local authorities have to deal with urban environmental challenges such as air quality, waste management, soil and noise pollution, and yet they will be the key actors in beginning the transformation towards a green economy. Indeed, Local and regional authorities were formally recognized in Rio as being major contributors to recreating a sustainable future. In this regard, in the Brussels region, we are developing a Green Jobs Pact in order to create green jobs and boost the green economy in the Brussels capital region. The first sector that was addressed was the construction sector. And recently, we've started also with the water sector, and the waste sector will be starting soon. I hope that these efforts will be recognized and shared by the European Commission, since the Brussels region is submitting again its application for the European Green Capital Award 2015. The initiative for the European Green Capital Award is a perfect example of how we can recognize the efforts made at the local city level. Local authorities often have the experience in the field and know the realities on the ground. Local and regional authorities should therefore be involved throughout the whole policy cycle, from elaboration to implementation of the European environmental policy. Nor should the role of the European Committee of the Region in this process be neglected. The Committee of the Region can collaborate in the discussions on the future 7th program. And for your information, together with the Committee of the Region, we signed an agreement in Rio with the United Nations Environment Programme to promote sustainable cities and regions in Europe, as well as at a global level. Another key issue will be the establishment of a possible SDG on sustainable consumption and production, which should enable us to consume and produce within the boundaries of our planet. This will be very important given the fact that in the coming decades, more and more people are expected to be lifted out of poverty and able to enjoy higher living standards. Yet, this will simply not be possible if we continue to live as we do today. At the European level, we should set an example and show the world that it's possible to maintain the same standard of living in a more sustainable way and while consuming fewer resources. And so sustainable consumption and production should therefore be a major issue addressed in the 7th program. Moreover, the 7th program should make it possible to broaden the existing concept of resource efficiency, extending it to sustainable consumption and production, and to develop indicators and objectives for resource efficiency as set out in the Resource Efficiency Roadmap published last year. The green economy has been recognized in Rio as an important tool for attaining sustainable development. The transition towards a global green economy is important, and we have to continue to try to convince our colleagues, the ministers of finance and of the economy, not only outside Europe but also within Europe, that the green economy is the only way to go. The 7th program should outline the path we have to take towards a green economy, including the external or global dimension, since we are living in a global economy. And I finish with a question: how will we attain this green and resource-efficient economy? The 7th program should include not only the issue of integration of environmental policy into other relevant policies, but also the issue of instruments, better use of existing instruments such as legal, economic or financial instruments, instruments for the evaluation of environmental policies, instruments permitting better implementation of existing policies and legislations, and instruments for sharing environmental information. Finally, I hope that the Commission will present us with an ambitious document, one that will build on all the existing European environmental policies and legislations in order to create a current and strong European environmental policy with a clear vision for reaching a sustainable world by 2050. I'm looking forward to the discussions we will have in the coming months on the 7th program and the future we want. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Evelyne. And I think 5:30 you will hear the truth from Carl Falkenberg representing the Commission. And you see, we have high expectations, Carl. But we know that you are on, so to say. Also, this session is making better decisions. So what could be better to continue on the political arena? And ich frage, können wir etwas from Österreich vielleicht erzählen? Können wir?
Natürlich können wir.
Gut.
So, does Europe need a renewed SDS in the light of Rio Plus 20? I could make it easy, say yes and save you 10 minutes, but I don't, of course. So what do we start with? The future we want in its Para 98 says we encourage regional, national, subnational and local authorities as appropriate to develop and utilize sustainable development strategies as key instruments for guiding decision-making and implementation of sustainable development at all levels. And in this regard, we recognize that integrated social, economic and environmental data and information, as well as effective analysis and assessment of implementation, are important in decision-making processes. So there is a certain political will for sustainable development strategies, I think. There was a meeting of the ESDN, the European Sustainable Development Network, that I have the honor to chair for many years, immediately after Rio. And in the communiqué from this conference, we said, in the context of sustainable development, there is no crisis of sustainable development. Instead, sustainable development is an answer to the current crisis. And in this context, we ask for reviewing the European Sustainable Development Strategy. Chair, you said in your introduction, we have Europe 2020, and let's use Europe 2020 and make it a sustainable development strategy, or let's use it for sustainable development. So maybe it's worth to look into it, what we did before, but a bit closer. Growth and employment are the goals of Europe 2020. I'm not against growth, even, but I don't think that growth can be the goal. Growth is asked to be sustainable, and if you have seen Leida Reinhardt's slides this morning, then this hamster became a monster, and with green growth it became a monster as well, but a green monster. I'm not against economic growth at all, but I do think that economy has to respect planetary boundaries, has to be environmentally sound, has to respect social consequences, and then this economy can also grow in GDP terms, but then growth is not the goal, but growth is happening because of the right economy. This is a nice discussion that I also like very much. We have a conference next week in Vienna on these growth issues. But maybe it doesn't bring us any further in the question if we do need a sustainable development strategy or if we can use the Europe 2020. Europe 2020 on the positive side includes energy, includes climate, includes resource efficiency and the roadmap. And Commissioner Potočnik this morning was referring to the European semester when he said that more than half of the member states were asked to shift taxes from labor to environment. Austria is among these member states. So it looks like that the European semester, the governance of the Europe 2020, can be used for sustainable development. Member states have to write a national reform program every year. I personally think that the name is misleading, because the National Reform Program in reality is a monitoring report. You say what you have done during the last 12 months and you include a few measures that you plan to do during the next 12 months. And as an environment ministry, you are also allowed to say something. Normally they tell you on page 3, and there is a paragraph and there you can say something on climate, and on page 4 is a paragraph and there you say something on resources, which is very nice, and it is. And then the Commission comes, sits down with the member states and the stakeholders, and you receive your recommendations from the Commission. In this case, the tax shift and others, gender pay gap is also always an issue in Austria. So the governance of this Europe 2020 obviously is not bad, is working and is better than the governments that we had in the Sustainable Development Strategy, because that didn't really work. We had a group that was chaired by the Commission and that only met once or twice, because then we were never invited anymore. So Europe 2020 has something on the positive side. And as the Minister mentioned, we will have a 7th Environment Action Programme in the near future. So maybe we have to sit down and see what do we have in Europe 2020, what do we have in the 7th EAP, and what is missing. Maybe the international dimension is missing because Europe 2020 is designed to be more a domestic strategy. Maybe we need a new framework for sustainable development. I personally don't think that we need 100 pages strategy with hundreds of nitty-gritty measures. I think that we should work with the Europe 2020 and the 7th EAP and see what is missing. And the starting point could be or should be the review of the SDS. There is a lot of outdated stuff in it, but the strategy is from 2006, so 6 years old. But the issues like health or climate or energy, they are still valid. And then we have to see what is still missing. It might be implementation, it might be integration, and you probably all would agree we have to integrate, but I think we have to carefully integrate. We from the environment side, we all the time integrate into economy and into the social dimension, but the others don't integrate all the time into the environment. So I think we have to be careful that we don't lose also with the integration. Also, of course, it is important that we find a way to work together with the economy and with the social dimension. We have to use instruments like impact assessment for future policies and for sustainable development. So I think we should have a discussion among member states with the Commission. Could we in the future change Europe 2020? Could we add something to Europe 2020? Or do we need, in addition to Europe 2020, a sustainable development strategy that is a framework maybe? When I was asked to talk about this SDS, I thought, my goodness, once again, what should I say what I didn't say in the last years? But I have to say I underestimated that things are happening, and there is a lot of discussion in the Council at the moment going on occasion of the conclusions on the Rio +20 follow-up. And many member states seem to be of the opinion that the revision or a review of the SDS is necessary. And there are discussions going on with the Commission on this issue. I'm not sure that the Commission is so convinced in some member states that we need it. Or maybe the question is, when do we need it? Karl Falkenberg will maybe say something on that, but I can imagine that also the Commission would see this as an outdated strategy, so we need to do something with it. And the question is, when do we do something with it, or when does the Commission do something? And what do the member states ask for? So I think we need something for sustainable development. We use the old SDS as a starting point. We also use Europe 2020, and we see how we can fill the gaps, maybe together with interested stakeholders and the civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. I think you really touched the topic. I mean, if we need a new SDS. But what I said was that if Barroso or the Commission will think that there is only one strategy and the strategy is 2020, then we need to secure that there is a perspective totally horizontal for all the strategy, for the whole strategy that raises the sustainable development strategy, because nobody perhaps will do it. But I am unsure. I mean, I am open if we should request a new strategy. But of course, sustainable development, it's a horizontal issue and needs to be everywhere, even into our own behavior as individuals. You also mentioned the growth. And is this traditional calculation of economic growth is the right thing? And I know that EEB have your opinion, and we have had the same opinion that we need another calculation. I mean, could an accident contribute to an economic growth. It's a little stupid, I have to say. But when you talk with economists, you know what the answer is. It's, I mean, and of course we understand it is complicated, you need statistics, you need, but I think we need to focus what you said also, another more parameter on how growth is calculated in order to fulfill that we talk about sustainable growth and green. Nevertheless, the next question is if it was a failure or if it was a reasonable compromise. And this is a topic for Hugo to reflect on. Please take your 6 or 6.5 minutes.
So let's see if I'm taller here than over there. So you asked me to start with something personal. Well, that cost me more than 7 minutes. But nevertheless, the day before yesterday, I was on a small island in the front of our coast. And I'm not referring to the United Kingdom, but it was a small island called Terschelling. With Jim McNeil, Wouter van Dieren, all the foundation fathers of the Club of Rome. I was only 17 then, by the way. And I asked the group, did you think Rio +20 was a failure? And 90 voted yes, it was a failure. And then I asked again, but after Copenhagen, what would you expect then? And perhaps before that, after the WTO Doha round, what do you expect? Are you really thinking that this is the only way how to continue in this field? So then the real debate started. Is this the only way how to continue? So perhaps Europe is the single and first player that could think about this, because the others stop us to think. They are very excellent no-sayers, differently perhaps. The United States and Canada have a different kind of reasoning for saying no. The BRICS or the basic countries say no, or other countries say no. But let's take the lead in how to listen better, what they are saying, why they are saying this, and also to respect them for the way they say it. Not always, but at least ask our diplomatic services, for instance, why are these countries so non-cooperative? And are they non-cooperative? Perhaps Europe should refrain and try to be less arrogant. At least that's what I hear. They see us as arrogant. We always are the best one. We give the example, we do it better. And we are amongst each other, that's the truth, but it's not how they see it. So that's at least something we should work on. And I believe strongly climate and sustainability is the first example where we can work on this. And without compromising on the content, but at least working on diplomacy, working on negotiating, and working on policies. Instead of perhaps a comprehensive, strong, legally binding instrument, I know already I'm getting to a weak sentence, but perhaps, and it's in the title of my intervention, also we should work on a country-by-country approach, sector-by-sector approach, business to business, finance to finance. I heard this all in the panel, by the way, not this panel, but the rapporteurs. They also are looking for these type of approaches. And perhaps, and I'm referring to Elisabeth, it doesn't matter too much what the motivation is. Perhaps it's to bring the cost down. Then they are integrating in our policy. Huh? It's their, of course, motivation by business is to bring the costs of labor and the cost of resources down, or energy, or natural resources, or perhaps geopolitics. That's not new. It's always a factor of let's say, tension to water, So it could be all kind of argumentation. It doesn't matter to me. So new coalitions are possible. And, but then the last question to solve is, but what about then the solution? Are we getting there through this different period? My position would be, no, we still need a multilateral governance, because otherwise, in the first period, there are no corridors without a conference. This is some of our main football players always say, these one sentences, no corridors without a conference. Number two, there are instruments. We need to have a global level playing field, of course. Not on each and every instrument, but we need those kind of governments. For instance also, and I heard this here in this room as well, transparency. I heard the word also accountability. We need global conferences to measure at the global, but also the regional and national scale. And then we can say we achieved the goal we have set for ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugo. And you said sector by sector and business by business. You also said that you have a very clear message. We need a multilateral governance. That was a very clear message from you. When we listened to the debate in Rio, and of course before Rio, it was obvious that there was a field between the representatives for development and the representatives from environmental side. And of course, this is the two sides which need some coherence. And generally, we talk about making better decisions. Of course, in all decisions, we also need a cohesion, that there is a cohesion between different policies, not contradictory to themselves. Now we move on, and Martino, yes, Maya.
Nearly. Wrong person, it's Catherine. Sorry, the program's changed, so you're going to have to put up with me, I'm afraid. Maya is my colleague, yeah. So, so my name's Catherine Pearce. I'm the Future Justice Manager with the World Future Council. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to EEB to the kind invitation to speak today. So I've been invited to speak on governance structures that respect the rights of future generations, and I have a helper with me to go through the slides, which is great. So I'd like to start by going back to Stockholm 40 years ago, where two important principles, not quite yet, where two important principles were agreed, which recognized the responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations, and the need to safeguard natural resources for present and future generations. Some 24 regional and global conventions and declarations adopt a variety of approaches to respecting and safeguarding for future generations, starting in 1945 with the UN Charter, quickly followed by the International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling in 1946. Yet the absence in our governance structures of mechanisms and tools to help us adequately safeguard our future is stark. We're all witness to the short-termism infesting our political and budgetary cycles and the silo thinking of our narrow, linear, departmental remits. Sustainability concerns are at the margins of decisions and budgets. International and national governance structures are poorly equipped to make long-term decisions or to apply integrated thinking to respond to some complex challenges of our time. The current zigzag pathway of our policy incoherence often leads to unintended negative consequences and the costs in redressing them. Quite simply, the interests of here and now are closing down the preconditions for fulfilling lives in the future. And the Brundtland report said it far better than I. Our own extensive research on successful, easily implementable solutions to bring intergenerational responsibility and justice has demonstrated the value of an ombudsperson or guardian for future generations. Intergenerational equity is a poorly understood concept by policymakers, and even less so in terms of how it should be put into practice. This institution seeks to change that. This independent voice would work as an active advocate for the interests and needs of future generations with integrated analysis to highlight how many of the apparent short-term economic costs should be factored as vital investments for future risk prevention. Now, this is not to suggest that one isolated anonymous figure would sit at a decision-making table acting as the spokesperson for future generations, vehemently drawing red lines through projects or vetoing any policy or decision they deemed risky. This is not a proposal that we would wish to put forward, and it would probably take the strongest Belgian beer to convince any government too. Rather, this is an institution supported by a multidisciplinary staff, catalysing analysis and calling upon external expertise to help navigate, inform and facilitate decision makers, creating the political space, vision and leadership to make informed, difficult decisions and identifying unpopular yet inevitable trade-offs for current and future generations. In so doing, this embeds the long term into today's governance structures, helps us to harvest the potential and mitigate the systemic risks and vulnerabilities associated with new policies and decisions. A small office working in cooperation with existing institutions and agencies is a small cost compared to savings made by more efficient policy making. And a quick snapshot, next graph, thank you, of the kind of job description we'd be looking at: evaluating policies, providing analysis and advice and insight on long-term trends, some of the kind of science-policy interface we were talking about this morning, mediate between different departments to ensure policy coherence, provide the checks and balances required to meet longer-term sustainability goals, and act as catalysts, bringing the interests of present and future generations. This is a message we took to Rio. We entered, cutting a very, very long story short, we entered the final negotiating hours at Rio with a proposal for the establishment at the international UN level of a high-level representative for sustainable development and future generations. I have some photos just to show some of the actions that were taking place in Rio outside the negotiating halls that kind of link to our proposal. Civil society, UN agencies, and many governments were behind us. It quite simply just captured imaginations. There was wide recognition that this proposal would resonate with many of the potential Rio outcomes, including new commitments on measurements to redefine growth and well-being, implementation of the SDGs, and the form and functions of the proposed high-level political forum to ensure it doesn't recreate the mistakes of previous governance structures. There is no strong body of law recognising the rights of future generations. This institution would therefore not have the jurisdiction, let alone capacity, to deal with citizens' complaints. Clearly, however, better understanding and awareness of the needs of future generations is required, perhaps with a more formal, systemic strategy for implementation at the international level across the UN architecture. Over time, one would expect the role to evolve in a similar way to the High Commissioners for Refugees and Human Rights. And last one, thanks. Overall, the outcomes of Rio showed us that, if anything, the need to establish a principal advocate for the interests and needs of future generations is all the more pressing and apparent. The UN Secretary-General has been invited to present a report on future generations and intergenerational solidarity. A number of UN agencies have already been lined up to participate. The final report is to be completed... Sorry, I don't know why I just nodded to you, sorry. The final report is to be completed by next summer and presented to the General Assembly in September, October of next year. We've already written an open letter to the Secretary-General outlining some of our key messages. Ultimately, the report should offer a strong set of recommendations to promote this important agenda. In this room, I see many supporters to this initiative, not least the European Economic and Social Committee. Governments of Norway, Switzerland, Montenegro, and the EU have all been long-standing, strong supporters of this initiative. The final proposal for a high-level representative for sustainable development and future generations is in fact EU language. The EU continues to call for this proposal, and we look forward to continue working with them. We also look forward to working with other governments to see national institutions established where appropriate. The European Network of Ombudsmen consists of over 90 offices in 32 European countries, serving as an effective mechanism for cooperation on case handling. They are rarely, if at all, involved in landmark environmental or sustainability cases. Now, I mention it because this network has been suggested as taking an important role in Commissioner Potočnik's drive to improve implementation of EU environmental legislation. They would handle complaints or work to improve cooperation between bodies. It's an interesting departure, but it raises a number of questions. And perhaps this is going back to the policy office of the EEB in me, but I have a call out to any EEB members in the room who would like to contact their national ombudsman and ask them how they perceive this invitation and the kind of preparations that they are making to take this role on. Back at the original Rio, it was the government of Malta which formally tabled a proposal for Guardian for Future Generations, and the text is here. The proposal fell, unfortunately, but Malta is now planning to introduce its own Guardian for Future Generations as part of its Sustainable Development Act, which has just gone through Parliament. There are some 30 national constitutions which reference future generations, and as you see, there are a number of national institutions already in place, the most prominent being the Parliamentary Commissioner in Hungary, which we selected as a model because of the strength and principles upon which it's based. And these are some of the achievements of the Hungarian Commissioner. And despite this incredible work, well, perhaps because of it, the post was sadly downgraded to deputy, and as a result, the Commissioner, Dr. Sándor Philip, has recently reluctantly resigned. With greater awareness of the value of these institutions and a stronger network between them, one would hope that the threat of international condemnation would discourage governments from doing what Hungary has done. Here in Belgium, 2 members of the National Parliament presented a resolution proposal calling for the government to establish a Guardian for Future Generations attached to the National Parliament. It's still pending. And finally, with some good news, an environmental ombudsperson has been recently appointed in the Philippines, and taking into account the immense sustainability challenges facing that country, we will follow that with much anticipation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And from the committee side, we have supported that there should be a future ombudsman. But you have also made an innovation, because you talk about ombudsperson, because ombudsman is a very male-dominated word. So it's congratulate.
Thank you.
Okay, we have to move on. Jan Gustav. Last time I listened to you, I think you spoke around more than 1 hour, but on the other side, we have asked you to come to brief us before Rio. Now we have a little more limited time, but I'm happy to see you back and to see what you can sum up after what's happening in Rio. Jan Gustav.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Can see you.
Yeah. That's right. Thank you very much. My name is Jan Gustav Strandenes. I'm a Norwegian national, and I carry greetings to you all from outside of Europe. I'm working with a British-based organization called the Stakeholder Forum, and my responsibility is governance. I'm trained as a historian, and let me just give you a bit of perspective which I think is needed. I've heard today that many keep saying that Rio was a failure, and you know, I keep asking myself what constitutes a failure for an international organization or an international conference. Well, we need expectations, and what are the expectations we have? I happened to be in Rio 20 years ago, and we were adamant at criticizing Agenda 21 and the Rio principles for being a total failure. This time in Rio, we hailed it as the graal of sustainable development. Don't forget our perspectives. And I'm not only saying that as a historian. So, the future we want, I would say the outcome document is a pragmatic one and a paradigmatic one for a number of reasons. Making better decisions. Yes, a prerequisite for that is, of course, to have good governance at a basis. And the IFSD, the Institutional Framework for Sustainable Development and Good Governance, came out of Rio strengthened. That's my firm opinion. Well, what's my basis? My basis was that Stakeholder Forum received a consultancy task from the UN, so I have been following the process for 4 years. Now, that may be, of course, give me a prejudiced profile, but anyway, I think it came out strongly and better. Paragraph 10 is the basis for the governance. If you haven't read it, I think you should. Now, I will run over a few of these slides, so don't worry if you don't get it all, you can read it afterwards. This is the new technique of slides. You put a lot of into it because it will be posted afterwards. But if you read that, you see that it is good governance that is at the basis. And I was mentioned earlier today, paragraph 13 is the basis for decision making. It talks about influence, participation, decision making, and it talks about all working together. Are there any deficits in this? Yes. Leida Reinhardt from ANPED earlier pointed to the fact that in the same paragraphs, and there are 17 references to sustainable growth on the economy, it's quite a sustained growth. It's quite interesting how it contradicts itself if you read these paragraphs. The future we want. Well, the document has no problem in stating that good governance is a necessity in the struggle to establish a world based on sustainable development. And it's all about sustainable development and the integration of the three, not pillars, the three dimensions of sustainable development. And let's be honest and let's look at that as a progress of understanding integration processes. Pillars are difficult to integrate, dimensions are possible. Well, the reflections on the outcome document, such a process as we have been witnessed has never taken place. I say this as in the history of humanity. As a historian, I can say that because the civil society and major groups were mentioned 8 out of the 29 paragraphs at a General Assembly resolution. Never happened before. It's the result of an open and interactive process. As you remember, the Bureau invited all stakeholders in the world to participate, to contribute to the zero draft document. Also a novelty. What does it say? Well, it actually both puts people at its centers and a bit later on it puts environment at its center. So it's a bit confusing there, but good governance permeates the document. It says a necessity. Collaboration with civil society, a necessity. Environmental protection, a necessity. The three dimensions, again, a necessity. Not to achieve sustainable development is a setback for developing nations. You've never seen that at a summit document where G77 has approved this. This is new. Going down through there, acknowledging the importance of corporate sustainability, yes, it's weak, and we wanted a lot more, and we're a bit disappointed. The interesting dilemma here was that a lot of the big power, high-level corporations that were there said, we want this, and the delegation said, no, you don't. So there's an interesting discrepancy there. Access to information, science, technology interface, commitment to work together with major groups, all of this is there. Level playing fields is now not obliterated, but it has become a universal presence. This is also new. The CBDR, the common but differentiated responsibility, is no longer used as a blocking argument by G77. And as I said, environment accepted as a major issue. Well, the green economy was a bit of disappointment, I grant you that. We wanted more. We really had high hopes. But the process has at least begun, as has been pointed out a number of times today. However, it does lack a government structure. High-level forum to replace the CSD. We wanted a council. We didn't get that. Strengthening UNEP with universal membership. Achim Steiner said that this morning. Cities and local communities and civil society at every level. All of these have given a new position at the General Assembly document. The understanding of good governance permeates the document. I've said that already. The high-level forum. Now, this is where I ask, what is the EU going to do with this? Is it going to give us a new, strong mechanism at the UN that really deals with sustainable development at the highest possible level? Well, read paragraph 84 and 85 and listen to this. It's not capitalized. Don't capitalize it when you write about it. The fact that it's written with lowercase letters means that it is a placeholder term. This will be discussed over the next 2-3 months. And it says in paragraph 84, building on the strength, experiences, resources, and inclusive participation modalities of the Commission. That means that the best practices of the last 20 years should be in the new mechanisms. Don't forget that. This is very, very strong languages. And then 14 processes have been started by this document. It's up to us to participate or not. We have the opportunity. Maybe we have to fight to get in some of these processes, but in principle, they're all open to us. I'm not going to elaborate on this. Some of them you know, others you may not have seen because you haven't read the document properly. Now, the process promised so much. It did promise a lot because it was so open, it was very, very generous in involving civil society at all levels. But maybe because of this, did the delegations listen to the voices of civil society in the end? Most did, some didn't, and those who didn't were quite powerful in not doing so. And if and when they listened, did we as civil society have good constructive input to come with? Sometimes we failed. Will both parties be on a different level in the future? Will we have that opportunity now? What decisions and which governance premises for better decisions are found throughout the document? We have the opportunity now to deliver on these. If we walk away from these processes, we'll leave this space open for actors that may take the development into a direction we may strongly disagree with. Walking away is no solution. Preserving and development governance is of paramount opportunity and importance. And this is important because the windows of opportunity for civil society to interact on multilateral systems is actually closing. Beware of that. So we need to fight for this opening. The future is about sustainable development governance. It's about integrating the three dimensions, and it's about the full participation of civil society. So let's govern the future we want. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Jan Gustav, I understood your tactics because you compensated the limitation of time with the speed. And you can be happy. But you can be happy that there was no interpretation because the services, they have protested. But thank you very much for a very comprehensive. And you said people to influence. And of course, this is what we had on the title, how governance, is it strengthened or weakened? But I also think that without civil society, for instance, like what we try to represent, but all of you coming from member organization to EEB, I mean, without, you don't have only the engagement, you have also a lot of knowledge, which is absolutely needed. It's not on the political level. Carl could be as clever as he is, but without people engagement, there will be no solution. And when I took the office of the committee, I had the title Engaging People for a Sustainable Europe. But I also always add a sustainable word in all its sense, not only, of course, to talk about sustainable development, is also historically, perhaps I want to say this in the crucial moment we have in the European Union. Catherine, I was intended to say to you also, when I was in the weekend 22 hours at home, I was meeting for this time 4 of my grandchildren. And of course, I think about what will be their future. And when we reflect on the past, the history, sometimes we think, how could it happen that we have 10, 12 years ago a war in the Western Balkans? How could it happen? How could it happen with the Second World War? And when we reflect longer time, we can always ask the question, how could it happen? And my question is, what will the future generation ask the question, how could it happen during our lifetime? So now we have the possibility to have a broad debate, and the floor is open. Because we have to focus on making better decisions. I am quite sure you have some things to put for discussion. Please, I don't know all names. I have friends here and there, but please, present yourself, if you know who you are.
I'm Peter De Paus from the European Environment Bureau. I actually just had a very quick question to Jan Gustav about the window of opportunity for civil society to get involved is closing. But before, you said one of the good things about Rio is that there's a lot of commitment to good governance is going to get better. So I would have thought that the window of opportunity would actually get bigger instead of smaller as a result.
We take a range of chain of questions, then we can reply from the panel. Please, don't be so shy, even if it is late on the day. You.
Yeah, I know it's a bit outrageous. I've been talking so much today, but there's one issue that I really wanted to put, probably especially to you, Sissi, and Hugo, because you're representing EU governments, and it's about I mean, there's a long list of failures or disappointments we can talk about from Rio +20, but I think for me one of the most striking ones was that it's done virtually nothing. I could almost say nothing at all to strengthen the framework of international law. I'm talking about law now, not soft law. I'm talking about real treaties. I think the closest we came to it was in relation to an agreement to make a decision by 2014 on whether or not to develop something under UNCLOS dealing with the areas of the sea beyond national jurisdiction. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was about as close as we came, which is, I find quite disturbing, and maybe I have a kind of a bias here because I spent more than 10 years running a secretariat for an international treaty in the UN system. So I have quite a belief in law as opposed to non-binding instruments. And I would be interested to know whether, I mean, of course, we know there was a lot of opposition to anything binding from non-EU countries, especially the United States, but also many others as well. But inside the EU, I also sense there isn't much appetite, and I'm challenging you a bit here. Would it be correct to say there isn't much appetite for extending the framework of international law that governs sustainable development issues? Thank you.
If you don't ask, I will order you. You got the question about if there is a need for a sustainable development strategy, SDS once more, revised, or if it is enough to have a so-called SMART covering everything. Give your comments, please.
Whether the Sustainable Development Strategy would be the answer. And sometimes it feels like we're just moving from one future document to another in the hope that the next document will solve the things that weren't solved in the previous one. So I'm not saying whether it's a good or bad idea, but it's a real concern that we just move when it may be that it's not going to work and we need to be working somewhere else to do it. I mean, I think resource efficiency is a good approach on these things, but it does miss out things. And the question of where we go next, I think we need to be a lot clearer about what it's intended to achieve.
Thank you very much. Christoph. And good, you see, they have, if I ask you, you have a question or a comment, you can have a statement, whatever you want.
Krzysztof Kamieniecki from Poland, Institute for Sustainable Development. I have a question or maybe comments. It means that when I was listening all this presentation today, what struck me is that we all mentioned governments, business, sometimes trade unions, new generation, future generation which existed, frankly speaking, because they were presented on these pictures. Nobody mentioned the new movements of young people and our impact on their views and their impact on our views. I mean, these all people who are saying we will not pay, we are not going to be politician supporters. So I think that we are losing something, not trying to find the way to communicate with them, or they do not interest in environment at all, and they are interested in completely different issues. So if it is like that, it means that they maybe are at the same level as governments which are not dealing with environment, with business which is not getting any responsibility for environment, or trade unions leaders which also are reacting to environment. I see here a gap. It is not a question, it is a comment.
Okay, anybody else? Ingeborg? Or you have, yes, in the...
Yes, Fergal Daff from the Irish Environmental Network. One of the things that was raised today by Commissioner Potocnik was that the idea of going ahead with a small group of countries to try and lead the way forward, and also with businesses. Now, this was one of the more positive common threads, I think, that came out of Rio, because many civil society groups, for example, the Gaian League at the People's Summit, and at, of course, the B4E Summit, people like Peter Baker spoke about this. And perhaps this is one of the way forwards, to recognize that, trying to get agreements with so many countries, 191 countries, is so difficult. Perhaps the way forward is to start with a few countries. And the invitation was issued to us today by the Commissioner. So I think this is something we should start focusing on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else before? Yeah, please.
Jouni Nissinen, Finnish Association for Nature Conservation, also an EEB board member. One thing which actually has become clear to me today is that one of the things that on the national level we have to bring up with regards to Rio Plus 20 is something that is missing out of the final document, namely the planetary boundaries and the whole sense of urgency in tackling the problems. And I think if we are talking about making better decisions, even if Jan Gustav's presentation was as elaborate and cunning as always, still it kind of hides the point that it really is missing even in this wonderful piece of international documentation as the which is the Rio Declaration. So maybe this is a question to all of you. How do we make the decisions so better, so that this sense of urgency and the planetary boundaries are then actually reflected in the future documents? How can it be done?
We move the microphone a little to that side, yes.
Andy Miles, Scottish Environment Link. This is a statement really rather than a question. What I'd like to say is that as we sort of seem to run out of steam here at the end of the day, there's a lot of people at this conference who seem to be quite tired, and I've got to concede that quite often I feel quite tired in fighting for the environment after all these years. And I can't think that the Rio Plus 20 event was a great success. Today earlier at the parallel session we had Paul de Klerk from Friends of the Earth giving the opinion that it in fact had many ways had been captured by international business. I think that we all, if we really care about the environment and our planet and a sustainable future, have to start thinking about how we act, how we participate, and how much we can do this effectively. If we're going to make better decisions together, then I think that the time has come for our advocacy strategies to be reviewed and improved. Because although there was great participation at Rio, I'm not sure that our advocacy strategy was that great. And I would just remind people that if we're not taking part and participating in making better decisions, you can bet your bottom dollar that business will be.
Thank you very much. Should we try in the last 10 minutes to sum up a little from the speakers and to see who will start to reflect on the... Do you want to start, please?
If I may, to take one question of our host, Jeremy, about law. I'm a lawyer myself as well. And then the remark about the young people. Yeah, I think you're right. There is a hesitance to speak about institutions and rules. Institutions in the UN premises, it's always echt een nacht process, one step and then one step back, or perhaps the other way around. You're totally right. So it doesn't bring us much, and we spend all our time and money on. Indeed, the lawmaking used to be better. I still can mention some progress apart from the seas. Indeed, you're right, the oceans. But before that, the chemical treaties were merged a little bit, one secretariat, but that's a very, very small step. Who knows? But perhaps there we need to find another approach as well, because we have some young lawyers, and there's my bridge towards the second point, young lawyers studying in China and the United States. And they come up with PhDs that explain why the Chinese and why the Americans hate these multilateral international obligations. But then the next question would be of yours, what don't they hate? How could we find other ways to agree upon? So that will be the next PhD, I hope. But perhaps economic instruments. Sorry not to have the answer, but you're totally right in your observation that we have to find other means. They see this as the old way. It's the European way to deal with this. WTO, okay, the Chinese said we have to become a member of the club. So, well, Carol can tell everything about this. Then we have to, one way or the other, accept this. But this is the last time we ever will accept this dictate of the West. And about the young people, yes, I don't know if you remember the young ladies in the Dutch delegation with very red jackets in Rio. Those were the Dutch ladies, and they didn't ask for any payment. They just needed a badge to enter in the premises. And they come up with a whole machinery in the corridors. And they were not interested in the text. They were not interested in the government, I have to admit. And it's a totally new generation of, especially ladies, because the men are the men outnumber and the old men outnumber always the young ladies. So I think there is the future, and even on this small island, I was saying, I was a minority, and my hair is not even gray, so I totally agree with your observation that where are the young people? I have good hopes in the universities. They will come also in a different way.
Thank you very much. Elisabeth, do you want to continue?
I continue. I'm not a lawyer, so I take another question. I'm an economist. I would like to continue with the youth. I attended a conference on youth issues, and there was a final podium. There were 5 politicians and the moderator. The politicians were men, and the moderator was the man as well. I was a bit involved in the organization, so there were women invited, but on the podium, finally, they were men. And then somebody stood up and said, the average Austrian is 47 years old, and more than 50% are women. The average on the podium is 59 years, and all of them are men, and they talk about youth. And so it was a very lively discussion at the end. And finally, one of these guys said, I don't need to sit here, and gave the microphone to a young lady, so they changed seat. I wanted to refer to this question that last year we said that resource efficiency is the answer, and now we say the new SDS is the answer. Maybe there is not one answer, but resource efficiency is a part of the answer, if it belongs to Europe 2020 or not. But resource efficiency is important. And the 7th EAP or N Environment Action Programme is important because it gives member states also an opportunity to discuss with the Commission what has to happen in the next years, and it's also a program for the next years. So what I said before is that we need a framework for governance. I think under sustainable development we need more than one thing. The framework can be a sustainable development strategy, but maybe it is also Europe 2020 plus other things, or including other things like resource efficiency. And then somebody said, how can we make decision making better? I think one thing is participation, if we take it serious. So not only asking people, but also really discussing with people and trying to understand what people want to have. And we from the administration and you from the NGOs, I think we together have to convince politicians by data, but maybe also by spending time with them, because when I see why is Europe 2020 so important, because heads of state and the president of the Commission think it is important, and that's why they take these decisions. So if they would feel sustainable development is the most important thing, then they would take other decisions. So we have to work together, I think, to influence policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. And Catherine.
Thanks. I know it wasn't a question, but maybe talking a little bit about the kind of youth movements and the organizations. I mean, obviously we worked very closely with youth, and we found them, you know, at the UN level, the major group youth, and all the different groups that made up that contingency were extremely organized and active and engaged. And in fact, the pictures that you saw, a lot of those were from people from, you know, the youth groups who just turned up and just immediately kind of sprang into action. But it wasn't just youth that we were working with. We worked with youth movements across the world, but also with other major groups too. I mean, this isn't just a youth issue. This is an issue covering, you know, broad aspects of civil society. So we work with women, hence the ombudsperson title as opposed to ombudsman. You know, with indigenous peoples, with other NGOs, with science and business too. And so we were trying to reach out to many elements and corners of civil society. And in fact, sometimes we found the muddle between future generations and youth kind of quite obvious. And it proved itself in Rio itself at a very senior level in the UN of this confusion of if you're talking about future generations and all the issues that brings, or if you're just talking about youth. And so there is a special representative who will be appointed for youth in the UN, and that presented confusion for many people we were working with. And just to touch on the urgency question, I mean, I think I was reading through my presentation and I thought, is there any sense of urgency in what I'm saying here? But perhaps that didn't convey itself. I mean, of course the urgency is a key aspect to this proposal and the initiative. And when we came away from Rio with the option of having a report written by the Secretary General and his colleagues in the UN agencies, well, we thought, well, the last thing we want is another report that will just sit in a drawer that no one will read. It's hardly the kind of urgency that we're really talking about. But I think the proposal, the principles by which ombudsperson or guardian, by which it would sit at the heart of government, really like biting at the heels of decision makers to say, you know, look at these issues and really bringing it to a broader perspective right in their faces. That's the kind of urgency that this proposal and this institution would need to convey.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And Jan Gustav. You can speak in Norwegian if you want, but nobody understands. But if you want.
I know the fate of not being understood as a country being outside other unions. Anyway, thank you very much, Staffan. I was asked a direct question, how can I reconcile the fact that I'm saying that IFSD or governance came away strengthened and at the same time say that the windows of opportunities are closing? Well, the reality says that a lot of governments out there do not necessarily like civil society and their participation in multilateral systems. Going back 10 years to 2002, the IFSD or the governance issues were strengthened, and they said civil society and the major groups should still be part of the CSD. What happened in CSD 11 when the modalities were developed was that the dialogue sessions, which in the first decade of CSD lasted for 1.5 days, was cut to 1.5 hours. That is the kind of windows of opportunities that are being closed. Catherine showed pictures from a small, peaceful and regularized demonstration. The youth were assigned, it was said, "Have you forgotten me?" And they had a little tape across indicating they were not allowed to speak. That incident was used by one of the major powers at a closing session, accusing civil society of breaking the rules at a General Assembly session and demanded a security investigation, and they said reprisal will be expected. Democracy Watch this year can tell us that it's the first time in the last 10 years that the democratic institutions are now going downwards instead of upwards. So we need to fight those fights, and it's extremely important that we stay the course and not go home from a UN meeting at 5 o'clock, even though we're used to that. Those meetings ends when the chair adjourns it. On the youth, I couldn't agree more with what's being said about the youth. In part of the consultancy that was given to Stakeholder Forum was training. And we tried to develop a mentoring program. We didn't get all the money we got, but we got quite a lot of it from the EU. So we were able actually to train some 1,200 people over the year and a half we were working on this all over the world. Mentoring roles is extremely important, and I do also do a lot of lecturing in my own country at university, and I can say that the interest in multilateral systems and sustainable development and governance is on the increase, not only in my country. I so agree with my friend Joni from Finland that the planetary boundaries didn't make it into the discussion, but it again is the first time we have seriously seen at the GA level or a summit level document talking about science, the interface between science and policy, and also what they call evidence-based decisions. So we're on the move. It's not fast, but we're moving in the right direction. And finally, you might have guessed I'm an optimist, and of course there is a philosophical discussion about optimism, and throughout the day I've heard this reference to half full or half empty. That's one discussion. It doesn't go well in the western part of my country because there are a lot of totalitarians there and they're very religious about it. But you know, you've heard this, that the optimist is likely to say that the world is fantastic, it's got opportunities, and the pessimist is always afraid that the optimist is right. My friend from Scotland said, "I'm a bit tired after all this." We don't have that opportunity to be tired in this fight. 1962, that's quite a few years ago. Rachel Carson published her book Silent Spring. She was a lonely voice, and she was ridiculed by her male colleagues. The difference between 1962 and Rachel Carson with one voice and today is that there's a global audience out there willing to do something. There's a huge difference, and that's part of the result of all we've done. Let me finish with two quotes. Sassoon, a British poet, said once that those who create decide. And we're creative, so we can make the right decisions. And my favorite quote is from William Shakespeare, who 500 years ago said, "Action is eloquence." Now, let's act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan Gustav. And from my point of view, I will thank you all. And of course, I can only assure you when it comes to the role we have at the European Economic and Social Committee and advisory body by the treaty, we are very much focused on continue to work on this issue we have discussed today. And we have the setup of the observatory. We have 33 members engaged and focused on. And of course, when it comes to making better decisions, there we have the role when we can give opinions, where we can also advise both the Commission, the Council, and of course the European Parliament. And coming from what is the body for civil society, I will underline that, of course, we need to discuss and to do this together with all of you, together with European networks, European organizations. And in this case, we are together. And I also want to say that if we want to change, we need also to stay behind the politicians when they take difficult decisions. Because there could be a difficult decision which is absolutely needed to take. In these sessions, we have not touched nobody of you have touched the situation European Union is in. But I think this could not, from my point of view, be a way to escape from the change we need to do. Every day we read in the newspaper that the expectation of the climate, of the change in Arctic, in everything is, in my view, increasing. So we need to take also the crisis as the challenges. When we change and when we restore, then we do it in a sustainable way. But I also think, Carl, everything starts with ourselves. We can ask, and somebody of you say, a document to another document. Of course, this is useless. So everything starts if we, as individual and in the families, do the right thing. But I'm still optimistic. We held, this is my last comment, we held in the springtime a session. We invited 3 young people, 14, 15 years old, to play the role of the committee in a session. They have just the topic of sustainable development. And when I met some of these young girls and boys, I saw their engagement, and it was fantastic. So I am optimist, and I think if we don't believe in the future that change is possible, there is no future. Thank you very much to EEB for inviting us to this panel, and now you will have the truth story from probably Carl.